It is quite extraordinary. You mentioned there, about the lack of protest about, female genital mutilation, or the lack of emphasis on it, or in the LGBT case, the LGBT lobby in Britain, I'm sure it's the same in America, very, very strong, going on after Russia maybe, but you almost never hear them talking about these countries ever. I wonder what you thought, therefore, of something like the Me Too movement, which got enormous purchase, didn't it, in the media? This is sort of like
Yeah.
a kind of, not exactly a displacement activity, but it's about, well, dare I say it, sort of basically privileged women, in Hollywood, maybe. This is the point.
Yes, you're absolutely correct. And you mentioned Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who is my personal hero. She wrote a book recently called Pray,
Mm.
which basically talks about how the Me Too movement was very, very big and for exactly what you just described, for privileged women in Hollywood. It was very helpful for them. But when it started to, when we start looking at women, less privileged women in other parts of America or in other parts of Europe, there is not nearly that kind of support for those women. In fact, the opposite is true. So again, if we talk about all of the rape gangs in the UK, the reason why those women were ignored for so long was because they were not privileged women. That was part of it. And the other part of it, of course, is because most of the perpetrators were Pakistani Muslim. So these women were thrown to the wolves, essentially. They were ignored by the system. There were politicians, there were journalists, there were all sorts of people who tried to blow the whistle on the situation, but they were called Islamophobes, they were called racists. And so these women were, they did not get to be valued the way other women were. The hashtag Me Too movement did nothing for them. They were ignored. And
Well, I
so
think
that's
that,
a sad reality.
I mean, I think that yes, exactly, ignored. I mean, I think that maybe one of the problems with this is that, as you say, the idea of Muslim people as being victims, but also it's sort of like this fear of being called a racist, which of course is actually nothing to do, as you've pointed out. You're talking about a religion. You're not talking about a race, are you?
No, you're absolutely not. And it's important to note, too, that within that religion, there are people who are political Muslims. So they are called Islamists. So it's not just in an immutable characteristic or somebody's faith. This is a political decision. This is like saying this person is, a communist or whatever. Like this is a political affiliation. An Islamist is somebody who is really trying to spread Islam in a nefarious way. So I will give you a good example. There is a book written by Majid Nawaz, who he is from London.
Yeah.
His book is called Radical, and he was part of Hizb ut-Tahrir, which are an Islamist group. And he describes, in explicit detail, how when he was an Islamist, he used all of these supports for Muslims or this narrative of Muslims being victims, or this attack of anybody who says anything about Muslims, attacking them as racists or bigots. They used all of that as a means of protecting themselves so that they could do their nefarious work quietly without being, subjected to authorities paying attention to what they were doing. He tells a story of how they even had pictures of a woman in niqab carrying a machine gun, and when they were posting those pictures up around the university, and when his the dean of his department or somebody called him into their office and said, look, you can't be putting these pictures up, this is violent, this is pushing a political agenda, he accused the school administration of being racist. And so they backed off and they said, okay, sorry, keep those up, keep those things up. And they were allowed to roam free in his university until somebody was killed in the quad, in the middle of their university. Somebody ended up being stabbed to death. And so then the university finally said, okay, enough. We can't allow these Islamists to continue to run free.
Yes.
And that's kind of what you see happening in France as well. There's this constant, no, it's not happening. It's okay. Just ignore it until things get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. France is only reacting now after rivers of blood. How many hundreds of people have been killed in France, in the past decade due to jihadis, innocent people going to a theater, same thing happening for you in the UK. You had the Ariana Grande concert, you have, all sorts of attacks on the different bridges across your country. These are continually ignored and until things get so bad that people will finally be forced to react. And, that's not the best case scenario. That can be very ugly if you let things fester for that long.
Yes. I mean, on that point, actually, before I ask you a bit about yourself, how does Islam and criticism of Islam fit into the current woke onslaught? I know you've been talking about it you've been talking about Islam for a long time, but I mean, I'm basically talking about the last year. Black Lives Matter, the woke agenda, all of these things have come to the fore. Where does Islam sit in that?
Well, it's anti-West.
Yeah.
So they are, standing hand in hand in their both have hate for the West and for Western values and for, liberal values and democratic values. So they support each other in that way. And unfortunately, we've seen these alliances happen before. We've seen it happen in Iraq. We've seen it happen in Iran. We've seen it happen in Syria. And it always turns out very badly for the far left. They're obviously just, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. They're short-term buddies or allies for the time being. But, Islamists, of course, disagree with anybody on the left. Islamism is a very, very, it's a fascist ideology. I'm going to plug a third book for you called Islamofascism, written by Hamid Abdus-Samad, who is an Egyptian German, and where he talks about that, just the parallels, just to let people see that there is fascism within this ideology of political Islam, because people just tend to see it as an Eastern religion like Buddhism or Hinduism or something like that. They see it as something exotic and kind, and they're unwilling to recognize, to acknowledge what these Muslim majority countries look like, what people living under Sharia, how they are living, especially women, how are they surviving? So for them to think that it's just a docile, benign religion or benign ideology that we shouldn't be concerned about is, it's a choice to be that ignorant.
Yeah, I think that what happens here is that, for example, if there's a terrorist attack, it will be, you can almost set your watch by it. Within about a day, the Prime Minister or a major figure will say, this is a perversion of Islam, and then also Islam is a religion of peace, and we must not therefore start tarring everyone with the same brush, all of these things. But the point is that people have kind of got slightly wise to this, now, but it doesn't change anything. But these are the responses we have.
Yes, it's very Orwellian to me. It's very, slavery is freedom, war is peace.
Yes.
I understand why they would want to say that. I understand that they do not want people to be bigoted towards your average Muslim woman in a hijab
Right.
riding the tube or something like that. I understand that. But to pretend that it is a religion of peace, or to pretend, I mean, we all know we don't, it's almost insulting to try to convince people that, you know, that Islam is not at the root cause of the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, you know, of Al Qaeda, of Boko Haram, of, you know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Islamist, you know, Islamic terrorist organizations. We understand that there is a connection between the two, and continually trying to tell us that there isn't is going to make people untrusting of whoever it is that's trying to tell them that. And it's going to make them even more nervous of Muslims, because they're feeling like, hang on a minute, why are you trying to pull the wool over my eyes? You know, so there should be an honest discussion. There needs to be an honest conversation. And that's not happening, unfortunately. They keep on going to this binary of all or nothing. And I mean, you see it quite often with the woke, right? All white people are racist. Like there's a very absoluteness with the way they speak, which is so incredibly childish. It's Disney-esque with this binary of, you know, good guys wear white hats and bad guys wear black hats. It's not like that. Islam is a religion, and Muslims are within a spectrum. And that spectrum can be anywhere from somebody like Majid Nawaz, author of Radical that I mentioned, all the way to Osama bin Laden, or you know, the Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, leader of ISIS. So we have to have a conversation that includes that nuance, because those people that, like, how many people were responsible for what happened to Samuel Paty? It turns out there was like over 50 people responsible. There were parents, there were kids, there were imams from the mosques, there were all sorts of, you know, Muslim organizations spreading Samuel Paty's picture and his address on social media. This was you know, it was not, as they always like to placate the public by saying, oh, it was a lone wolf. Oh, it was just another lone wolf. Oh, look, another lone wolf. You know, they just happen to keep on having a bunch of lone wolves, you know, because they want people to feel,
you know, sorry, the other one we have here a lot is mental health problems.
Yes.
That's the other one, you know.
Yeah, and it's insulting. It's insulting to the citizens, and people deserve to be treated with respect. And the conversation needs to happen where people do express that there are, of course, most human beings are good people, right? Within any ideology, or within any race, or with any religion, or within whatever, most human beings are good people. But we cannot pretend that there is not a group of people that are inspired by their ideology to pick up a knife and stab people, or to cover themselves in a suicide vest and go kill infidels. These things happen all the time because there is a root cause for it, and that discussion needs to happen. First and foremost, it needs to happen within the Muslim community themselves. And I do see that happening sometimes. So if there was one imam in France who was trying to speak up when the Samuel Paty tragedy happened, and of course he's now in hiding, similar to the Batley Grammar School teacher, and his life was also, they threatened his life and his family's life, but he was still speaking up. As a Muslim imam, it means a lot for him to speak up. And there are a lot of Muslims who are trying to fight this violent ideology within their own camp, but they unfortunately are not being supported by the wider society. The wider society is instead calling them native informants, Uncle Toms, all sorts of slurs. And we want to stick to the binary of no, 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 no. All Muslims are good people. Islam is a religion of peace. Don't listen to these Muslims who are trying to speak out against the violence in their camp. I'm trying to remember the name of a man in London who just recently wrote a book where he went around to a whole bunch of different mosques all around the UK, and he was exposing what was happening in those mosques, what children were being taught, what people were being taught when they went for their Friday prayers during the sermon, during the khutbah. I'm sorry, I can't remember his name, but he's a co-founder of an organization called Quilliam, which is a counterterrorism group.
Oh, right. Yes, yes.
Yeah, so he's a Muslim again, speaking up. He is saying these things are true. Stop saying it's a religion of peace. Stop saying it's racist to speak out against these violent Islamists. This is a problem. We need to address this problem. We need to teach our children differently. We need to stop thinking that anti-Semitism is okay because we're trying to free Palestine. These are conversations that need to happen within the Muslim community. And this is why the subtitle of my book is How Western Liberals Empower Radical Islam, is because the Western liberals think that they're doing a good deed by shutting down this conversation, by shutting down this criticism that is so dire. This criticism needs to be voiced. It needs to be voiced. We need to listen to the voices within the community that are speaking up, and we need to support them. We should not be shutting them down and continuing to support the conservative Muslims or the fundamentalist Muslims instead.